Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to our symposium, Working for What? Architectural Labour, Organising Work and Professionalisation. I'm Dr. Claire Jamieson. I'm Senior Lecturer in History and Theory of Architecture here, and I'm also course leader for our Part 2 Architecture course. This is my colleague, Reishin Kunishima Watabe. He is a Vice-Chancellor's Scholar, very fancy, currently doing his PhD with us. I'm one of his supervisors. Jessica's sitting there. And we're both part of the Centre for Urban and Built Ecologies, CUBE, which is our research centre under which this event's being hosted. So a few bits of housekeeping before we get on to the good stuff. Toilets, the nearest ones are in the basement of that area there, so just go straight down the stairs or there's a lift. There are also some more, if you go up the stairs towards the entrance on your right, there's a disabled toilet, or back at the entrance where you came in. If you hear a fire alarm today, it's not a drill. We've got some fire wardens with us. They'll be wearing yellow tabards. Exit out of those doors or through that corridor into that space there. And then there's an exit at the end of that kind of alleyway. And we would gather at a place called Resolution Plaza, which is our kind of safe assembly point. So we're very happy you could join us today to discuss what we think are some of the key issues facing the profession. The history of the architectural profession is one characterised by frequent crises of identity and values. A profession that's often struggled to let go of the legacy of the brass plate and the image of the kind of gentleman professional. And it's also suffered from many public crises of confidence and equally felt failed by its institutes. And it's within the context of the history of the profession that we come together today to explore the ways in which architects have and continue to identify variously as part of the professional elite, as creative practitioners, as architectural workers, and many other kind of identities in the spaces between. We want to ask what role organising and unionisation has, both historically and today, in shaping the identity and work of the architectural practitioner. How can these structures, both outside and within the boundaries of practice, influence the status and value of architectural work in the context of the broader built environment professions?
I don't have notes, so hopefully this is going to be all right. I think we really had a sense that this discourse was happening in the pub, in offices, by the water cooler, and we just thought, actually, in a way, there's a lot of noise, and we really thought there was a really important time and space to be able to actually formulate some of these ideas and actually structure them and think about, in a way, so many of these stories have existed long before us today, as you'll see through the rest of the papers, but really to tap into these stories, these histories, and these practices that have been happening, are happening, many of whom are here today. So for the day is really fantastic. So we're going to start with Sarah. I'm going to be chairing, and we're going to hopefully have a wonderful time. We're then going to go straight into the first session, which is about histories of unionization. We've got Claire speaking, and Ed and Aska. And then we will have a short break. Lunch break, yes, sorry. We have a lunch break. We don't have lunch catered today. It's the shoestring budget, but there's a great Market Street on Golston Street, so get some food or get a Tesco meal deal, come back here and chat. We also have amazing material from the special collections just behind you there in the glass cabinets. Do take a look. It's kind of old union material. It's really cool, actually, and there's some readable material just on the right there that you can touch as well. And then we will reconvene for the international perspectives, where we have international unions. We've got members from the USA, Sweden, and Germany, and of course in the UK here. That will be a kind of hybrid event, and we're hoping a really interesting time to understand how things are different abroad as well as at home. I believe we then have our last break, yes, which we will have coffee again. Hopefully by this time we're all marinating and all chatting, and we can kind of enjoy coffee with some of those chats. And then we will enter our last session, which is about professionalization. We have Professor Ijia Troyani there, who's just published a new book. We also have Shumi from UAL, and Eleanor Joliffe, and myself. And then we will have closing statements, which will hopefully will have something very wise and sage and polemic to say. And then we unfortunately have a time limit on the space, so we'll have to kind of usher everyone out. But we have picked a pub, the Duke of Wellington, which is on Toynbee Street. It has a cute beer garden. Hopefully it won't rain. That we can kind of further continue these conversations, should you be so inclined. And that sums up the day. I'm excited.
Okay. Well, first to say thank you very much for the invitation to talk here this morning. I'm really delighted to talk about topics of great concern and certainly, interest to me over the course of my career. So it was really nice to be able to share some current thinking. I'm going to read this because I've spent quite a bit of time composing it and putting it together, so bear with me as I'm trying to make a coherent argument. But there will be chance for questions later, and actually I'm going to be here all day because now I haven't got a practice to run. It's really nice to be able to spend a day talking about issues of great interest to me with lots of other people. So, if you want to say anything informally, please do so. Otherwise, air your question at the end. Okay, so here goes. In March this year, after 31 years of trading, I closed the practice that I founded. The reasons were many. In recent years, projects had stalled or been cancelled due to the stagnant economy, and particularly increased costs brought about by Brexit. Cash flow became unpredictable, resourcing a nightmare, and the Building Safety Act loomed on the horizon with unclear but very onerous implications for our CPD, our professional indemnity premium, and for my personal liability. During my time in practice, I witnessed the advent of computer-aided design and then BIM, and of myriad new software packages, causing me to wonder whether our work has actually improved or just become harder as we jump more speedily through higher hoops. And as AI is changing the role of the designer and procurement sucks the energy out of us, I felt really worn down and unable to summon the energy to address these new challenges. And significantly, none of my staff wished to take over the practice. They told me that they witnessed how stressful it was running a business, and they did not want that for themselves. Without the collective contribution made by this young generation, for the first time, I felt I didn't have the tools to address this oncoming tidal wave. So I began to ask myself, what am I achieving? What is the purpose of practice? Who are we serving? And why is it so hard to produce a good outcome? In short, my questions were really existential. What are we working for? One downside of possessing age and experience as I have is that I can recall a time when the purpose of architecture seemed much clearer, where the creation of the built environment was simpler and the rewards seemed greater. Gradually, the balance between enjoyment and sacrifice seems to have tipped in the wrong direction for me. In addition, the issues facing the business, the profession, and indeed society seem increasingly complex and irresolvable. I began to wonder what role I, as a citizen, but also an architect, individually and in collaboration, could have in trying to resolve them. Indeed, how much agency does the architect really have? And within our remit to help, and what is the role really of the profession and its representatives in fashioning that collective vision for the future? And is it within our remit to help resolve any of society's issues, or are we just simply swept along individual surfers on the cultural and political tide? While retrospection may not be useful in solving today's problems, what it does remind us of is that things haven't always been like this. They don't have to necessarily be more complicated, expensive, or precarious and risky. So in this talk, I want to unpack some of those issues that I believe are making more and more people, particularly those entering the profession, as well as specific communities, leave behind it to find rewards elsewhere. This really matters because when people leave architecture, we lose talent, they have spent good money on training for nothing, and they start their careers in a condition of disappointment, and their energy and ideas are lost to the industry. And moreover, our built environment suffers as caring, committed, and capable people leave the industry. So we risk devaluing the profession and turning it into a stagnant or even a toxic environment. So these questions and more seem to be at the heart of the conference theme. And to start, I'm going to unpick the situation by tracking some recent changes in the industry to place my comments in context. So the first section is about the neoliberal marketplace. Since the enclosures, the design of the built environment has been progressively privatized and commoditized through its close association with real estate, otherwise understood as land, ownership of land. So across the UK's history, landowners have been vested with privileged powers that have become a tool of control. It has given owners rights of eviction, rights to exploit their land's resources, rights to pollute, and rights to parliamentary vote to secure those privileges. The wealth generated thereby has vested landowners and developers with considerable influence over it. So one example is house building. By devolving the provision of housing to the private sector while weakening the planning system, which is really now all we have as the gatekeeper of the public good, we have granted house builders excessive potential to manipulate the market in their own favour by banking land, controlling supply, and determining what is on offer. In this way, house builders and developers can make large profits while creating environments that lack basic societal amenities such as public transport, schools, and community facilities. Even remediation of brownfield sites is expected to be done by the government. Architects are only involved in creating site layouts, employing housing templates from the developers' pattern books, dressed up in facades and treatments depending on location. Deregulation and increasing globalization has impacted on all aspects of our life, including architectural services. Professional ethics, which is to say, I'm using that to mean specialist knowledge and skill, dispassionate, objective advice, honesty, decency, and financial transparency, have been supplanted by business skills and salesmanship, wherein economic growth and competition are the mantras. Equally, the deregulation of building controls has led to sharp practice and obfuscation across all parts of the industry. Grenfell was the result of that. The removal of mandatory or even advisory fee scales, which were abandoned in the late 80s, leads to reduced fee income. This cascades down to staff, with unpaid interns adding to the free labour supply, and is one of the root causes of inequality in our business. This makes a mockery of any inclusion and diversity aims. It is also risky for practices where lower bids can lead to cutting corners, which again we saw in Grenfell. Inadequate fees devalue our work and undermine our status with the public. It leads to expectations that we will happily work for free. The proprietary powers are very reluctant to turn a stone that could reveal a fetid underside. The RIBA has not addressed the critical issue of procurement, which is seen as such a huge tax on everything that's done in architecture, especially in the public sector. Rather, it is the tireless work of outfits like Project Compass that has helped to shape the new procurement rules. Indeed, RIBA has presided over the exploitation of practices by managing competitions that involve huge amounts of under or unpaid work in the hope of winning that elusive breakthrough project. For example, of the several RIBA managed competitions that my firm won, none has been realized, adding to our distrust in the Institute's motives. It seems it is happier to promote its own role as facilitator and taste expert and offer free PR to clients using the seductive drawings that are produced than safeguard the welfare of its membership. At the same time, the commercialization of the architect's role has engendered a new class of architect actually more interested in their own brand than the welfare of those that occupy, build, manufacture the products used in their buildings. Clients wishing to symbolize their status by commissioning iconic structures will find many ambitious architects where the reward of fame is fame, status, good fees, and a reputation destined for the history books. Notwithstanding, many such projects are commissioned by regimes that are morally questionable. The dubious issues relating to the extraction, manufacture of building materials and construction can range across slave labor practices to overlooking health and safety on site, bad housing conditions for migrant workers, human rights abuses, environmental destruction, poisoning by extractive industries, and land grabs. Corrupt governments may have little regard for their own citizens' welfare, practicing ethnic cleansing or a form of apartheid. The imbalance of global power relations relating to the construction industry partially leads to these conditions. Architects often justify their involvement in these regimes by saying that every nation has its own dilemmas. They defend these commissions on the grounds of their own economic necessity, or they point to the potential to change through the power of, quote, engagement. An alternative interpretation might be that these are oversized practices, and that their engagement is a form of neocolonialism. Another view put forward is that it isn't the architect's role to judge, and nor is it in their gift to change conditions in these distant locations. Their role is neutral. Yet by pandering to these governments and these arguments, we reinforce and legitimize unethical regimes and offer them both status and tacit approval. So while architects might delude themselves of their own autonomy, it is actually impossible to escape the external conditions that provide us with our work. It is up to us to draw the ethical line at a point that preserves our integrity and our right to act as trustworthy professionals. And a representative body should uphold these standards on behalf of us all. The situation I've described, such as fee cutting, exploitation of workers, long hours culture, the insecurity all feature heavily in architectural practice. The business of architectural work is highly competitive and deadline driven, comes with huge liabilities and few career rewards in terms of pension, parental leave, or clear career progression. This is not conducive to creativity nor attractive for a diverse range of design talent. To take one example, it is no surprise that the proportion of women, which is 49% in architectural education, is down to 31% after 5 years in practice. Compare this with law, 53%, and medicine, 48%. This brain drain should be a wake-up call for our profession. I personally believe that low pay and a large gender pay gap caused by fee cutting, poor career support, and restricted access to higher positions, the long hours expectation and caring responsibilities all leave few options for women and lead to the exodus of talent. For too many, peer respect and prestigious prestigious commissions are not enough to sustain a viable life as an architect. And so I come to our representative body and examine its role in making this happen. I'm going to paint a professional context now. All professions are granted the right to organize and protect their knowledge in return for guarantees to society as a whole that they can be trusted to bring about a high level of competence, honesty, and care to what they do. That's the deal. The RIBA was granted the right to act as a body representing us, although it was not the ultimate arbiter. It is not the arbiter of the professional gateway, obviously, which is ARB. So the RIBA is a kind of club, membership club only. RIBA's charter, however, drawn up in 1837 and supplemented in 1971, cites its mission quite clearly. Quote, for the general advancement of civil architecture and for promoting and facilitating the acquirement of knowledge of the various arts and sciences connected therewith. It being an art as tending greatly to promote the domestic convenience of citizens and the public improvement and embellishment of towns and cities. It goes on to define the RIBA's specific powers under the Charter in the following areas. First, in education, which includes awards, exhibitions, and lectures. In research, in its influence on government and public opinion, in the ability to raise money through subscription or donation, and finally, to manage as a trust the care of its objects, which include things like the library and its artifacts, including its drawing collection. So in its role as guardian of education, the RIBA's position has really not kept pace with the current industry demands and context. It has seen the delamination of its joint role with ARB as guardian of curriculum, leading to confusion and twice the amount of work for academics in these quinquennial audits. Notwithstanding its claims over our knowledge base, there has only ever in my lifetime been one full academic who was elected as president. This underscores the sense that the profession only serves those in practice. The oft-voiced skepticism about the competency of students and hence teachers, aided by a very British scorn for intellect, is reflected in the common view that if you can't do, you teach. With this as the prevailing orthodoxy, is it any wonder that the constant griping about the value of education remains unresolved, a running sore between two separate spheres of endeavour? The situation is further exacerbated by the roles accorded to practitioners in schools of architecture, which tend to be non-researching teaching roles in the studio. This signals the inferiority of design as a research device in its own right. And at the same time, higher learning, such as achieving a PhD in architecture, will not assist your career path in practice, simply delaying your advancement. It used to be that design knowledge was valued and held as a status object, and that design research leading to improved outcomes was encouraged. But the example of school design shows how little value this is now perceived to carry. So the nearly 80 years of research based on the knowledge of child development, known as the building bulletins, was trashed by Michael Gove in 2013. The large contractors have been entrusted with the role of delivering the school estate. In its sector reviews, the RIBA's annual yearbook and education now classes education in the commercial sector. Where were they in the fight against the commercialization of children's education? As regards engaging government, the RIBA's success is doubtful. It has witnessed the standing of professions generally, and the architectural profession in particular, steadily erode and has failed to take, in my opinion, a firm stance within the broader discourse of leadership within the built environment. It did not contribute meaningfully to the Grenfell investigations, and architects are now saddled with the burden of the BSA legislation. All the RIBA has done is to monetize its role in the additional accreditations it's now forming, setting up a new standard that we have to meet while charging us a fee for the training and the registration. In RIBA's role as holder of knowledge base and other assets, we have seen RIBA sell the NBS for no good reason, putting them beyond the reach of many small practices. The Institute, however, is unable to adequately fund exhibitions and is restricted in its scope to do so by its listed premises. It has struggled to create an appetite among the public for its work beyond a very limited clientele. It won't nurture a desire for its knowledge if it cannot excite an audience. Yet, working on a shoestring, the Architecture Foundation manages a more interesting lecture program than the RIBA, citing these in a popular venue. RIBA's awards also do not recognise any values beyond aesthetics, as far as I can see, despite the wide range of skills architects offer, reinforcing the view externally that architects only peddle high-cost, prestigious, institutional and large-scale projects. Beneath the specific remit stated in the Charter, there are other fundamental issues at stake. RIBA's own ethics are compromised despite the nice words in the Code of Professional Conduct. It is in the balance between doing good for society, its actual words are tending greatly to improve the domestic convenience of citizens and the public improvement, against acting in the interests of the client. Commercial interests typically trump other obligations. And in response to the threat of the climate crisis, RIBA has arrived very late at the party, adopting its current 2030 sustainability targets, finally, and overlooking its importance in crucial platforms such as the awards when it could and should have been leading the way. The structure of decision-making at the RIBA is convoluted and bureaucratic. Its president is really an honorary figure with dubious motives, which can sometimes seem self-serving. With a term of only 2 years, this is not long enough to make any real change. The cynic in me feels this might be deliberate. Council dilutes good ideas and does not pursue an agenda that is fit for the future headwinds coming our way. It is reactive rather than trailblazing, seemingly unable to take risks. Good ideas are discreetly put aside in favour of the status quo, and its members seek to retain power for themselves at all costs. The RIBA has a deep identity problem. It doesn't know whether it is in itself a power passing judgment on its membership, which, remember, is voluntary, or whether it is an activist organisation standing up for the discipline in the face of societal change and political manipulation. Lacking a clear vision in relation to external threats, yet declining to act in defence of its members, especially the small practices, which constitute 75% of its membership, it turns a noble discipline into a mere technical, rational exercise, swaying along with the ebb and flow of commerce. I believe that our profession is in such a terrible state that architecture's very existence is under threat. I also believe that the RIBA has stood aside and watched this unfold, focused on the wrong things and taking too long to bring about changes. Yet I am not alone in my sense of betrayal. In the recent election for the RIBA president, 9.3% of members voted. This alone tells us about the state of apathy, hopelessness, and disengagement architects feel with the current representative of our profession. I think that the profession's traits of being reasonable, gentlemanly, and objective have led us to the point where the RIBA has been weak in response to higher powers, while it's simultaneously tyrannical towards weaker entities such as educators and small firms. Its problems will impact smaller and more marginal practices the hardest, yet it is these practices that perhaps best recognise the Institute's limitations and the restructuring of practice as a broader agency that serves a clear social purpose. The process of atomisation that has accompanied the increasingly competitive nature of our work has divided us and left us without a sense of community or direction. While a communal interest group, whether a reformed RIBA or any other entity, addresses the issues of the built environment and the architecture, and architecture specifically upstream, dealing with the policy context, economics, and construction and risk issues which structurally hobble us, we need a representation for the workforce of architects at the receiving end of this chain. The Salaried Architects Group, which was a union of employed architects, belongs to an era before the emasculation of the workplace organisations. But in the year 1980, when I was in my year out, it was still in existence and still quite a powerful entity, and it could be revived. In addition, after years of undermining and the loudly voiced scepticism of our expertise peddled by previous administrations, I'm talking about government administrations here, we need to reinvent what the profession stands for in the modern society and hold ourselves to account for the manner in which we contribute to this broader project. Where and how we live affects all of our life chances, and those with power over the environment create the conditions that the rest of us endure. So it is beholden on them to act equitably and with civic duty in mind. This is, after all, the essence of being a professional in architecture. We need to explain how the built environment matters to society and rebuild public trust alongside the Charter in our mission to improve the civic realm, as the Charter stated. With a new government now intent on improving planning, there could and should be a new role for the architect in helping shape society. But we seem frightened of this expressing a political view, a condition that originates in capitalism and which breeds a desire for compliance and conservatism. The serf aligns itself with the master. But as Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. If we want to see change, nobody is going to do it for us. We need to take action and bring it about. Returning for a moment to the Institute's mission to promote the domestic convenience of citizens and the public improvement and embellishment of towns and cities, it does seem clear that there should be a link between our work and civic pride. Quality architecture is more than just a commodity. It is the glue that holds us all together, communicates our values, and expresses our social structures. Public architecture should be the best it can be, not second best, but producing good buildings takes time and shapes itself to the needs of those who will occupy it. The longer a building lasts, the better the design has to be, as it needs to fulfill future anticipated needs as well as those now. Engaging the people that will use it is essential, but it is a service that often comes too late and is too token. Building for the longer term also costs more, since materials will be more robust and longer lasting. And if we are to build with carbon in mind, we must retrofit existing stock and build using natural materials that will need more frequent maintenance and repair. All these costs will be repaid in the long term if we think of buildings not as one-off organizations of future waste, but as permanent resources, assets, and expressions of our own identity. As a community, we need to commit ourselves to these goals. In common understanding, the word architect means the author of something negative, something scheming and manipulative. Autonomy is a convenient fiction. We would be wise to act in unity with those that want the best for society, even if we argue about how to achieve it. I do not believe that the RIB and its BA in its current form as a representative of our unified community is capable of delivering that. I believe that the representation of our professional contract with society must originate in a new body, and this must campaign for a new identity for the architect. No longer should we be the businessman or woman or the developer's lackey. Neither do I see the solution in the old model of the tortured artists such as Howard Rourke, but in the more inclusive, linked communion characteristic of women's knowledge and women's associations. This feminization of the discipline must not mean a downgrading of status or salary, but rather should aim to reassert our importance in the social contract. This action could take many forms, including referencing the actions of those that fought for better recognition in the workplace through unionization or suffrage. Strength lies in acting collectively. For too long, the myth of individuality has tainted our ability to come together en masse. The atomization weakens us and stops us operating as a movement. But in a world where individuality plays a major role, I'm talking about architecture, as well as general society actually, how can we act as a collective and overcome the current trend towards identity politics and culture wars? In the face of recent dissatisfaction with the industry, we have seen the emergence of organisations challenging societies and the Institute's position in relation to the built environment. Architects Climate Action Network, Part W, the Paradigm Network, Future Architects Front, Built by Us, and Black Females in Architecture all hope to challenge the powerful interests that pervade the industry. But their niche interests all suffer from atomization and lack of funding, actually, limiting their power to challenge the status quo. Nevertheless, their ability to act swiftly, to set the agenda and hold a mirror up to authority should not be underestimated. Such organizations act as the conscience of the profession, reminding us of its remit to act ethically and with care for both people and planet. We need to revise and communicate architects' own worth and care for our own workforce. To win this right, we must find a new collective goal, so the public associate the word architect, for once, with doing good. In particular, a revised contract with resources is needed. Architects must recognise the huge challenge of the climate crisis and place its resolution centre stage in its work. If we continue to pursue aesthetics above all else, we will become the authors of our own evolutionary dead end. If we mobilise and skill up to address these challenges in coming years, there will be potentially less work, but it'll be better work. There will be higher fees for practices and better salaries for employees. The architect's role in society must be reimagined, moving away from the individualistic, autonomous star to being a facilitator of cultural and social relationships as expressed in material form. This is far broader and more difficult to achieve, as it demands both humility, listening skills, and knowledge sharing. This emphatically does not mean a downgrading of our role, but rather an expansion of our ability to create meaningful, resilient environments in all senses do not cost the earth. As the greatest threat we face, we need to gain technical competencies to retrofit and in green building, reconceptualize our relationship with the land and with people, and rebuild trust by taking responsibility for addressing, informing, and indicating how to tackle the climate crisis. Where there is nothing but commerce and money, there can be no thought. We must work to be on the side of history rather than greed. The best thing we can do to restore trust is to act with an ethical intent, showing how we have the good of society in our sights always. This includes our employees as well as our clients and users. We urgently need to reconceptualize our role in shaping the built environment. To conclude this critique, I'd like to set out how we could reinvent a professional body that is fit for the future. Just as in the 18th and 19th centuries, the medieval guilds morphed into the professions as a response to the challenges of that era, so I believe we need a new approach and a new body that is capable of addressing today's and future challenges. Short of tearing up the charter altogether, we start from where we are, but radical change could still be possible. It also needs to go along with a change in our behaviour, which includes this revised social contract, remembering in whose service we work, people and planet, together with robust sanctions for those that abuse these aims. We also need to become more competent. In a post-Grenfell, our technical capacities need to be sharpened up and applied consistency. In a post-Grenfell world, our technical capacities need to be sharpened up and applied consistency. So here are my ideas. These are not fully formed ideas. They are provocations to get you thinking about what this new body might be about. So the first thing is our ARB and RIBA should merge to become a new entity called the Agency of Architects. The new body will comprise 3 strands. 1, guardianship of the archive and assets. 2, competency to practice and teach. And 3, advocacy and public relations, aiming to raise the importance of the built environment with the public and why architects matter, and promote an external discourse about what our role is in society. Membership should be based on what type of architectural activity you perform, either as an academic or a practitioner. So if you wish to carry out those functions and call yourself an architect, you'd have to be a member. The new body would be funded by a contribution based on a percentage of practice turnover rather than an individual membership fee, with all staff employed welcome to participate in the decision-making that goes on within the body. The new body should work to obtain protection of function, not just title, function for buildings over a stated scale. The new body should insist on changes to procurement practice and liability insurance, which should be project-based, shared and collaborative within each design team or delivery team. The new body would need a revived governance structure that is able to make decisions swiftly. In place of council, a smaller group of regularly rotating people might form a steering group reflective of the movement's aims and architects' diverse composition and geographic boundaries. It would aim to reach out to architects, develop strategy and propose policy which can be implemented with an executive team. The conscience movements initiated by younger people, I've mentioned them, FAF, Part W, Paradigm, ACAN, BFA, and so forth, could unite to forge a modern agenda for the profession, seeking to address the challenges of tomorrow. They would set the agenda, and where there are differences of opinion, but they will have to resolve them, but the effort involved in managing these will be absolutely crucial to developing an agenda for the future that it has a clear ethic, as well as developing skills of negotiation and making sure that there is social equity and environmental protection. I would suggest that as part of this revolution, the president be abolished altogether and a 3-person rotating team of ambassadors, agents and advocates, one of whom should be from academia, be responsible for representing the industry to government and the public. These roles should be paid and they should last at least 3 years. The new body should relinquish its role in determining education up to Part 1, but should be a statutory collaborator in establishing the competency of Part 2 and the professional gateway. In the wake of Grenfell, a public exam at professional entry to guarantee standards with an agreed CPD structure and curriculum would help to re-establish trust with the public. This would allow courses to be more varied at undergraduate level, yet demand a tighter technical accreditation for qualification as a professional practitioner. This would be accompanied by the recognition of practical knowledge and design as a research tool within academia and a deeper collaboration between practice and university. Finally, there needs to be the development of a career path for practitioners within academia itself for teaching at parts 2 and 3. There should be a campaign to elect architects and other built environment professionals to Parliament. We need to get bums on seats there. The current headquarters at 66 Portland Place should be used solely as a revenue generator while the new body moves to a more economical premises or becomes peripatetic, visiting sites across the UK. In the longer term, the HQ could be leased or be converted into another facility such as a hotel, which is income generating. From the proceeds of this income, the new body should acquire premises to promote a conversation around architecture and the built environment. This venue should mount exhibitions, talks and conferences on matters relating to the built environment. It should institute a program of curatorial appointments to imaginatively deploy its historic buildings and photography collection and raise awareness in the public and stimulate discourse. An annual assembly akin to citizens' assemblies comprising local architectural organisations should take place at a roving venue to engage architects around the UK and debate policy. Localism should be promoted and addressing regional problems should be encouraged through shared information and support. The new body should make links with other organisations committed to improving the built environment, including other professionals, not-for-profits and charities working in the built environment. The larger body would carry increased heft, aiming to place the quality of the environment at the heart of social well-being. The new body should support research into the built environment by engaging BAYS, UKRI, Innovate UK, HEFKey and other bodies leveraging funding into the built environment disciplines, which are massively disadvantaged in the funding streams of research. Right, in summary, the environment is critical to our survival, yet it is subject to myriad contingent forces, many of which seek to destroy it. As co-creators of the built estate, architects are only too aware of the vested interests that lie largely beyond their control and how this makes it challenging to balance this triangular force field. But there are talented architects everywhere that are committed to the greater good, if the factors align. But if we are to produce an architecture that addresses the civic needs of society according to our original charter, we must collectively create the conditions for doing so. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Is this on? Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm going to chat and stall while you guys think of really amazing questions, I'm sure. There was so much there. Thanks so much. No, I mean, I think it's really interesting as a practitioner that you're navigating practice, education, and the kind of the big institution, and this kind of beef with the REBA is obviously really enjoyable to hear, personally. I suppose my first question or maybe response, I think you talk about really centralization and this kind of a policy propagation of kind of agglomerating collective interests. And I think that maybe that tension also with maybe your own practices kind of alternative position, or you mentioned FAF and ACAN and other groups that I think work in some ways on the peripheries to challenge and contest, the RIBA, which is a centralized body. And I wondered whether you could say more about, I guess, is the way forward really a kind of bigger public body or kind of institution, or is there agency within the kind of periphery as a general?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's massive agency within the periphery. And in a way, that's what I meant when I said that I thought these splinter organizations, if you like, are the conscience of the profession, because in a sense, they stand in relation to what it's doing and critique it. I mean, I understand what you're saying about, whether centralization is a sort of viable way of going. And I think I mean, as somebody who's part of Part W and has always stood on the margins, perhaps, I mean, it might be a surprising position to me to adopt, but I think in the context of running a small practice and feeling very marginal because of that, even though we're the biggest body, perhaps, of architects in the, membership of RIBA, it felt very, very isolating and sort of based around competition all the time, and our ability to sort of act collaboratively, I think, is, although it's given a lot of lip service, is actually not really there. And that's not surprising given the way that we're educated and the very deep-seated idea of the individual genius which underlies everything. Authorship and blah blah, creativity. So and that and that's still a really big issue. And actually, thinking about it, I sort of came to the conclusion that really I think collective action still has massive value, but because we live in an atomized environment, a sort of an environment where your individual identity is so important, and where sort of distinguishing yourself from others is really important, that we don't do it. And I think it's time to kind of think about what that entity might be. But I'm not talking about a sort of central command and control. What I've tried to illustrate is an idea about a kind of fluid body that can accept and reject people as time goes by, not ossified, but which is constantly re-examining and re-evaluating what it stands for through the incorporation of these marginal elements into its body. And so it's amoebic, it's a kind of live organism rather than an ossified body. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, yes, let's talk more about this, because it's really interesting, and I think it's really nice to hear you really talking about it from a position of care, actually, and a kind of anti-disciplinary structure that I think we crave, but we kind of maybe don't even know how to see it, actually. And so that, I think, that play with, I don't want to call it fantasy, but this you were talking about predict the architect's role in predicting the future in a way, and working with those intangible things. And I think it's really nice that you're using that, even though you're not now practicing in the traditional sense, that you're employing that in these kind of policy and institutional kinds of political arenas. I think is super interesting.
Well, as you probably know, I'm not the sort of architect which believes in the autonomy of the architect. I mean, context is absolutely everything. It creates the conditions, for everything we do, for the success that people get, the kind of projects they win, blah, 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 so I think it's absolutely structural and not acknowledged nearly enough.
I think we have a question here in the audience.
Okay. Yeah, I really enjoyed that, Sarah. Thank you so much. Very interested at the end section. And it felt like a little bit that we were missing a point about how much legislation is important as a backup to that. I remember the reason I say that is you mentioned the fee scale loss in the 1980s. Lots of architects had been undercutting before then, it was a legitimization of a practice that had begun to be commercially acceptable within the profession, because the RIBA did nothing about it before it abolished that. There was no striking off for the loss of the fee scale. But the other thing that happened at the time was related to procurement, for example. And one of the key aspects that happened, particularly in housing, was that in the 70s, a lot of housing schemes on plots of land had to be led by an architect. So the developer courted the architect to get the job. They had to form a team, and the lead, the person who landed the job was the architect, not the developer. And again, that was the case at Milton Keynes. And the very small shift that it appears to shift that around so that the developer then ran the scheme and was then courted by the architect radically changed the housing in Milton Keynes overnight. Radically, because there was no longer the idea that care and all of the aspects that we trained or have been trained in were the most important. The most important thing was the developer, who then led and found different ways that they wanted, which mostly to do with, as you say, developed later into land banking and all of those types of practices, which is it. So I wonder how much of the type of collective action you're advocating could happen without corresponding changes in legislation. Are you arguing that the advocacy would lead it? Because everything tells me that that's the other way around, that legislation has to lead. Without the legislation, the types of changes you're happening won't necessarily stick.
Yeah, I don't really talk about legislation, but I think it is really important. I mean, I did talk about getting MPs in Parliament, architectural MPs in Parliament. I think we've only got one, if we've got any, which I think is absolutely incredible, really. But yes, of course. And I mean, I'm on record saying that I think, legislation is really important. And I think that, the legislation has just tipped very, very far away from seeing anything that might smack of a monopoly, and that's really come about, I think, since Margaret Thatcher was in power. But, I think there's lots of double standards out there in legislation. So, for example, in developers' viability reports, they were allowed to make 20% profit. If our firm made 20% profit, we'd be laughing. Typically we made a loss all the time. And, I think it's not an equal playing field at all, which is why I think, there does need to be some form of legislative backup. But I'm just, it's a slow burn, I think what I'm arguing is that architects need to be more political. If we just sit here and complain about it, it won't happen. But they're not, because they're scared of upsetting the status quo, So perhaps we're in an era when we have a more receptive ear in government, and we have, the pendulum has swung so far towards to favour one sort of party in the built environment rather than others. And it's time that it's swung back a bit the other way to rebalance it so that, we can achieve better outcomes in architecture and still make a living and find it fulfilling to be an architect, because I think that's sort of really lacking at the moment. But I mean, there are other cultures, particularly in Europe, which do it very differently. For example, if you're building in Central Europe, the fees are fixed, and then you bid on the quality of your design work. So you're not involved in a race to the bottom anymore. It's factored into budgets by the developer, and it's done on quality. And we could be doing that, but people just cheap here.
Hi, I'm interested in your, I've got an observation and then a kind of question that riffs off it. So 35% of architects in the UK are kind of sole practitioners. So that leaves kind of the rest predominantly as employees. And my take on it is that being a good employee doesn't always equate to being the best architect. And I think trying to find the tool set that accommodates for pushing your political agendas within an employee context is key to unlocking this. I think if you observe like those splinter organisations and who are participating, predominantly they're employees, and it's kind of like a segue, an opportunity. I think you obviously that's not consistent, but I think if you look at the participation, for example, from ACAN, there's a lot of employees within that kind of organisation and who are kind of fueling movement forward. So how do we unlock better agency within those, that kind of large quantum of practicing architects to be able to kind of better push things forward? Because that whole mindset of being an employee, not a leader, not a business owner, and then facilitating that agency, I think part of that comes from also that segue within the academic transition. So we may do team projects within our kind of part 2 training, but we don't ever address how to navigate work within practice. And I'm just interested in your take on what those tools might look like.
I'm not sure I agree with your thesis. I mean, I think that it's the employees in a way that I think are holding us to account. Actually, I think it's the people who are disaffected by the powers that be that has led to the establishment of a lot of the movements that I talked about. So in a way, the power does rest with the workforce, and it's the leaders who have so many vested interests in aligning themselves with market forces, if you like, that won't say boo and aren't part of that movement. I think it's absolutely clear. So, I mean, in a way, I'm very unusual within our profession in that I'm prepared to stick my head above the parapet and probably get a reputation for being difficult and, challenging as a leader, and that's a problem.
I think that is exactly my thesis was, sorry if it was misunderstood. I think that it is exactly that. It's the employees that are pushing things forward. Yeah. And they're having to do that through forming splinter cells that aren't necessarily recognised within practice.
Yeah.
They don't then get recognised. So it's that transition back into change. So I think there's lots of energy going into recognising those opportunities and trying to push things forward. It's actually finding a faculty to bring it back into their practice.
Yeah.
That's missing.
Well, yes. I mean, there are people that are working on their individual practices. I mean, I know of several that are trying to sort of make changes from within. And I think that's really important because, again, it's holding the sort of older generation to account, put it that way. But I think it's good that these organizations, smaller sort of interest group organizations are there because they have a lot of power actually, and that's why I suggested that they become part of this new body, because actually they are the people thinking about what the future needs to be. It's not the people who hold the power at the moment, it's the people challenging the power. And so they need to be integrated. I mean, the problem being, the moment you're integrated in systems of power, you become emasculated and you become the new power, So that's why the constant churn is absolutely critical to keep the thing on its toes, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to sort of put some ideas out there because it's a really intractable problem. And I think, I started off saying the problem with being my age is that you kind of can look back and see how things were. And what's really tragic to me is that in 35, nearly 40 years of practice, not that much has changed and quite a lot has got worse, actually. We're still talking about these same old issues that haven't really moved on at all. And it's awful. I think it's more difficult now than when I first started out. Of course, I'm more jaded now. I was, and I've got less of a future, and so I'm perhaps less optimistic. But that's why I'm sort of trying to hand the baton, to say, you can actually make change. And of course, I think, when I mentioned the salaried architects group, that was constantly ridiculed by Hellman in building design when I was in my year out, because they were the sort of union of architects, demanding more from employers and la 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 la. And of course, that was in an era when there was still, public bodies which employed architects, very big architects firms in local authorities and things like that. So there was a sort of link between the practice and governance, let's put it that way, governments and governance. But at the same time, that was a conversation going on in practice generally about the workers. You don't really get that much anymore. And, certainly architecture is not unionized like many other businesses. And I've always wondered, why is that? What is it that, this is what I mean about the atomization of the profession. If we don't recognize that there are collective issues, we can't act as a whole. And the whole point about divide and rule is just that. You divide people, then you can rule them.
Thanks so much, Sarah. No. I think we just had one last question. I hope we can try and make it quick to stay on time. But I was just going to say this would be a great conversation with the unions section later, and we can talk about maybe that's a mechanism too. Please.
Thank you. Hopefully, can you hear? Okay. I think you partially started to respond to this, but I will start with, obviously, thank you very much for your presentation. And of course, the benefit of being your age is the clear wisdom you bring to these conversations. I think a piece that I would love for you to please expand upon is perhaps the business side of architecture and running, particularly in your position of having run a practice and creating award-winning architecture, irrespective of what that means and what that looks like. But you highlighted in your talk, professional ethics are supplanted by business growth and salesmanship. How important are these business skills in our present and future society? And can and should this new agency that's being proposed provide these business skills? Just maybe circling back to the earlier question on employee and employer, which are often pitted against each other, is a deeper understanding of the business of architecture more critical today, so that each party understands perhaps the forces, external and internal, that might cause some of the challenges that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Yeah, absolutely. I think architectural education is massively deficient in understanding how business works and so on. It was really ironic. When I was being trained, they used to say really snootily, "Oh, well, of course we're educating the future leaders of practice," and yet we were completely unprepared for how to go out there and, navigate the business world around us and everything. Well, I'm a lousy businesswoman. I really am. I don't have the right skills, and I wish I did. I wish I understood, land finance, real estate, how you raise money, how finance operates, blah, 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 because I do believe that having understanding the tools of your oppression help you to understand how to unpack them and deal with them. And I know you're doing a business course at the moment, so good on you. But yeah, I think it's massively deficient in architecture schools, and I don't really understand why. I do, because it goes back to all the old, 19th century architects about, is it a business or is it an art? Well, I just fed up with it being too much business, actually. I'm really interested in the fact, sorry, I'm droning on now, but I just want to say this. I listen to Front Row, and on Front Row, they have writers, poets, artists, theatre people, blah, blah, blah. When have we ever heard an architect take part in a cultural program on the BBC? It does not happen. We are not even within the cultural discourse of this country. And, we're just regarded as business people. Well, actually, that really annoys me. And our awards are, you know, they're just about ourselves. We just talk to ourselves and pat ourselves on the back and blah, blah, blah. We're irrelevant in the bigger cultural world. So, you know, it's a both and, I think. We have to be more out there about what value we can bring, stop patting ourselves on the back about the aesthetics, but at the same time, you know, get real about what's going on out there. I'm not saying we all have to buy into becoming, you know, greedy developers. I'm saying know your enemy and then work around it to do it better, because they've got one thing in mind and we could balance it with different things, you know.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that's fantastic words. Ooh, great words to end on. We're now going to move into our next session, but before that, just a great round of applause for Sarah for our keynote today.